Is capital's impact on the pro forma, and of course what we really care about is like what's the impact on the co-op. So let me just say a couple things real quick. First of all, the conference is about learning. It's also very much about networking. You can do a lot of learning on Zoom and YouTube, but you can't network. So take every opportunity you can to meet your peers. Go up to the tables and meet the folks up there that are here, because even if you're not in store design, there's a couple of store designers here. You can get their contact information, reach out to them when the time is right for you. So take advantage of that. Okay, let me just see real quick who's in the room. So the first question I have, I'm going to do it this way, is there anybody here with a co-op that's up and running? Okay, is anybody here got a site and they're under construction? It's kind of what I expected, right? Because we're really talking about capital, and that's going to come earlier. So how about, does anybody have a site locked in? They're working on design, financing. Okay, so you're in like 3A, the implementation stage. And what about, we're really looking for the site now. We're working on our capital campaign. Where are we there? This is what I expected. And the people who are like, okay, we're feasibility, right? We're making sure it work, great. And then of course there's folks, because we've all been through all these stages, there's folks that's working on organizing, right? We're still focused on bylaws and membership growth. I mean, you're always focused on membership growth, but early stages. Anybody here in that stage, stage one? And is there anyone here? Oh, good. Okay, great. Is anyone here who's, who I haven't called, be technical assistants, people, consultants, finance, lenders? Great. All right, excellent. I have a presentation for you, and of course I always think, well, so I do financial feasibility work, right? I do the pro formas. And so this is not my gig, right, to get up and make public speeches and stuff. So I'm always thinking, well, how can I explain kind of complicated, nuanced stuff in simple terms? And I never get it right. But so let me try this first. Why a co-op, right? This is where you have a little bit where I want your feedback. So tell me, why are you opening? I mean that there's different reasons in the mission. But the first one, of course, I'll give you the first one, right? Which is, well, we want to have a store. Right? That's pretty basic. That's what we all really think about. But probably at least some of you are thinking, no, we've got other reasons for opening our co-op. Anybody?
Self-determination. To improve accessibility to local, fresh, healthy produce.
Okay, so there's access. And in this case, it was fresh and local. What else? Somebody, yes?
Strengthening the small agriculture economy in our area.
What was the first word?
Strengthening the small agriculture.
Right, okay. So there's support local. I'm just going to put it that way. I saw a hand. Yes, ma'am.
Supporting local food jobs.
Food jobs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Community self-determination.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir. Okay.
For us, it really is bringing in racially diverse supply chain of agricultural producers into our Black and Brown community.
Good. All right. Did I knock the T over that time? So first time I was like, hey, I didn't even knock over the T.
I'll hold it.
It got bent somewhere along the way.
I'll just hold it like that. I'll be Vanna.
Very good. I'm almost done with it. That was a diverse supply chain.
Racially diverse.
Thank you for pulling it out. I shouldn't have done it off the paragraph.
You guys are very kind. Thank you. racially diverse supply chain. Thank you for
To promote food education and financial literacy.
food education
And financial literacy.
good. All right, we're going to stop with these. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to get the rest of my team all the way out. All right.
Sure.
Okay, that's a good list. And so think of that as your co-op. And wherever you are on this list, whichever ones are for you and some may not be, all of these are in this circle. You know, and most of the circle, really, at least for quite some time, most of the focus and the energy is going to have to be on the store. And you may have some other sources of funding along the way, but really primarily, in order to do the rest of this, the store is going to have to pay for it. Thanks. We'll leave it like that. Let's give Char a hand. All right. So the thing is, if the store's going to have to pay for it, right? Well, actually, I'm going to do a little bit more, but I'll work on holding it myself. And I think you might have got on the trick here. If the store's going to have to pay for it, like a customer comes in the store, right? And they buy something and they leave. And what do you have to cover with that? Right? Before you can pay for this stuff, what do you have to pay for on the customer's purchases?
Staffing.
Yeah, I need you to speak up for me.
Staffing.
Staff, yes. You've got to pay for the people. So I'm just going to flip that. So that's one thing you have to pay for.
The lease,
Okay, so you have the facility,
Utilities, lights,
product,
Overhead, whatever.
product.
Equipment.
So you've got to get the store, that's the equipment, I'm going to say is in that getting the store open. Right now I'm just thinking about the day-to-day operations.
utilities, lights, power, stuff like
Yep,
that.
okay, so you've got utilities. All right, and I'm just going to shorten it now and say you've got all the operating expenses, right? You have things like credit card merchant fees. You've got store supplies that go out. There's a long list.
insurance.
Insurance, people will haul trash for you. All of that's included, right? So if we were to put that, I might do it like this. I might say, you start with sales, and you got to pay for product. That's number one. You don't pay for product, you're out of business. And that, what you have left is gross profit. Okay, we're not on sources of capital yet, but we're getting there. Okay, now the next thing you subtract from gross profit is things like your people, your personnel expense, staffing, and all those other operating expense. And what you're left with is your net income. Okay, so we're almost done with this part, right? You want to pay for this stuff. You're going to have to pay for your product, your people, the other operating expenses, and you get your net. You're not quite done. So there's another concept I'll give you. We're going to take the net, we're going to say, what's really the core earnings? So we're going to add a couple of things back to it. And we're going to look at earnings before interest expense. And now, interest expense, that's part of the cost of your capital. Before interest, taxes. Oh, I meant to take off my mask. Sorry, this will make it easier for you here. taxes, and then depreciation. Because depreciation is an expense that's up here, but you don't spend money on it. So you add it back down here. And amortization, which is really, we say depreciation and amortization because they go hand in hand. And this is called EBITDA. So, EBITDA, right? So now, the last thing to think about here before I jump into the presentation is that your EBITDA gets you close to what you have left for this, except for one thing. And that is, if you've borrowed money in any form, some things are actually debt, and some things are equity, but they're debt-like, then you've got to pay for the privilege of using that capital. And at some point, you're going to have to return that capital to the investors. If you get a loan from the bank, it's going to be highly structured. If you get a loan from your members, it'll be structured. If you sell preferred shares to your members, it'll be less structured. But all of those, eventually, your goal will be pay for the privilege of having their money for some period of time and return their money to them. Okay. So then, you've got all of these costs, plus you have the costs of capital. And so you need to have enough EBITDA to pay the cost of capital. And then hopefully, you have more, because that's what's going to pay for the rest of, actually some of these, jobs is included in STORE, and self-determination, and racially diverse supply chain if everything works. But when you start talking about, like we want to provide food education and financial literacy, and there are other things that people have in their mission too, like they want to support the community and community growth. And those kinds of things have to get paid for. You've got to have still more left over here. So now we're going to talk about what happens with the pro forma, with what goes on in the store. I tend to just talk, so please interrupt me anytime, right? And I'll take questions at the end as well, but don't hesitate.
I have a question, sir.
Yes, sir.
So you have interest expense and EBITDA, and then you have cost of capital. So what would be the difference between paying for interest on a loan and interest expense and cost of capital?
Right.
Where does it fall in?
So we take out the interest here
Yeah.
to get to, this is earnings before interest. And then interest is included here. But we also have, like a mortgage payment, you make a principal payment and an interest payment. So we put all that back down here. That was a good question. So I'm going to show you the 4 cornerstones and 3 stages model briefly. And then we're going to take a look at these finances that we're talking about here. And we're going to have a little emphasis on the sources of funding, or the sources of capital. So if you haven't seen this, this is a model developed by some of my colleagues, including my mentor, Bill Gessner, who I have to mention just because he was an amazing man, who really pioneered all that I get to do today. It was also NCG and FCI, and you can find it on FCI's website. And the basic idea is that throughout the entire process of developing the co-op, you have to have the 4 cornerstones. And as you move through the stages, right? Stage 1 is organizing, 2 is feasibility and planning, 3 is implementation. As you move through those stages, you're going to need more and more. You need better and better systems. You need more and more money. You need more and more people with more skills. And your vision is going to continue to refine and grow as you move through the stages. Well, we're going to really look at this one, right? Capital, that's our focus right now. And there's the movement through all the stages. So, why do we create a pro forma? Right? We're trying to figure something out. Here you all are. You're in stage 1. Some of you are in stage 3. A lot of you in stage 2. And you're in here today because you're interested in capital, and we're going to look at all this through the lens of a pro forma. So why do we do the pro forma? There's a couple of questions we want to answer. Anybody, and I have specifics, but it's okay, make a guess.
Assumptions?
So you want to, so the pro forma is going to be full of assumptions, right? And then when we put all those in, we want to know something. We want to know, can we get the co-op open? How much is it going to cost to open that co-op? And how can we find the money to do that? But there's a second question that comes along with that. Once we get the co-op open, can we keep it open, right? That's what we're trying to figure out. So what do we need to know about getting the co-op open? Okay, how much money do we need, right? And where are we going to get it? And how much do we need? Well, these are some of the things we need it for. We're going to need money to convert a building into a grocery store. That might be more or less, depending on your particular co-op and your particular arrangement. You may have a mission-driven landlord. You may have a commercial landlord. You may be owning the building yourself. And those will all have an impact. You got to have enough for the equipment. And all of your pre-opening expenses, things like the labor that you're going to have to pay for before the store opens, the marketing before it opens, there's a list of those. And then you still need to have enough money at the end that the co-op can get through negative cash flow, right? So you got to have cash on hand or working capital. And where do we get it? Okay, there's a lot of places you can go. First of all, we're co-ops. We have members. Our members contribute to the co-op as part of their membership. And then you might go back to those same members and say, we need your help, right? We need you to buy preferred shares, and we'll pay you a dividend for that. Or we need you to loan us money, and we'll pay you interest for that. You might go out and get grants and donations, right? We're going to get to a place where we're talking about your narrative, and what the impact of that is. And with the right narrative, the right mission, you might be able to get more grants than another co-op. And you might not, but that's a particular source. And then you might, some co-ops, Gym City in Dayton, they went out and they have a mission-driven landlord, very closely associated, and they went out and got new market tax credits, which are federal tax credits for building, particularly employment centers in low-income census tracts. They're incredibly complicated, but people do them because they have a really good benefit. Tax increment financing is something that you might get from your city, but those are potential sources of funding. And at the end of the day, when you've exhausted all of your other sources of funding and you still need money to open the store, you're going to have to borrow it from an institution. Now, that institution might be Gym City again, very creative. So one of the things that they have is from a foundation, program-related investments, right? If foundations have $100 million, they have to have it somewhere. And typically, because they're not going to give it all away this year. They're going to give away, if they have $100 million, they might give away $5 million, but they need to invest the rest of it. Now, a lot of it will be invested in less risky investments, but a part of it will be invested in things that are related to their programs. That might be one kind of institutional loan. It'll come with rules. You might talk to some of the folks upstairs, like Leaf and Shared Capital. That's an institutional loan that comes with its own set of rules. And then, to me, the last resort, in my mind, is always a bank. Why is it the last resort for me? Because one of the things we like about banks is that they're federally insured, right? FDIC. In order to be FDIC insured, they work under a massive load of regulation. And that massive load of regulation gives them far less flexibility down the road if you happen to run into a problem with the, your sales weren't what you thought they were, or your cost of goods got out of hand. All these other lenders, if you're borrowing, they can be more flexible. Banks are more highly structured. Okay, so we talked about all these different kinds of sources, and this gets kind of to the heart of what we're talking about, right? What's the impact of capital? So since that's the title of the workshop, the answer to this question is probably
Yes.
yes, right? So let's look at 3 co-ops. And these are just the extremes, right? Because I already said there's a whole list of potential sources. But just to make it clear, Alpha's going to borrow all of their $5 million. They're going to pay 6.5% interest, and it's got a 10-year note. Beta is going to go to their members, and they're going to sell preferred shares, all preferred shares, 3% dividends. And Delta, they went out and got grants. They found grants for all of it. So what does that mean for each of these 3 co-ops?
Trouble for this one.
So Alpha, right, they're paying for the privilege of having the money for 10 years, but they're paying it back every year. So their debt service every year is $703,700, which means that when we're looking at this, the store has to, their sales minus the product and the people and all of that, at the end of the day, they would have to generate an additional $704,000 to stay in business, right? Because they're going to make their debt payment. Now Beta's paying a 3% dividend, so they're paying $150,000 a year. At the end of the 10 years, they still have investors that have $5 million in the co-op who really would like to get their money back. The preferred shares in our co-ops are not publicly traded. There's no public market for it. So the only opportunity that people have to get their money back is for the co-op to redeem them. And then Delta, they have no obligation. Now these are the extremes, right? Okay, so we're looking at the annual obligations for this $5 million. Now we're going to switch over. We're going to talk a little bit about what does this mean in terms of keeping the co-op open. It's kind of obvious, but I'm going to go through this again. So the real question that we have is more money flowing into the co-op, or is more money flowing out, right? If your money's flowing out, you got problems. And what affects that? So we've talked about like the store operations, right? Sales. Now, this is the cost of goods sold, right? The cost of the product, the operating expenses. And when we get that, right, it adds up to EBITDA. And EBITDA is what you have for your other major cash requirements, right? That's going to be the capital and all the things that we want to do besides. Oh, and you got another thing that you spend that EBITDA on. Every year, people are going to come in, they're going to shop, they're going to open the doors to the freezers, and eventually the freezers are going to wear out. Things need to be upgraded. Those are capital investments. They're not included here. They happen after EBITDA. If that's like, I don't really get that, I get my card, and we'll talk about the nuances of all that way it's all done. But you've got to pay for those capital expenditures. And that might be in year 8, you might have a major remodel, and you need $100,000, $150,000 for that remodel. Replacing worn out equipment, upgrading your store so that you remain competitive. The distribution of excess revenues, oh, that's another thing. The interest expense, as you pointed out, the interest expense is a real, or somebody did, it's a real expense. It's up here, which is why we added back. But the dividends on the preferred shares come out after net income, right? Because they're shares in the business, they're equity, so technically it's a distribution of our excess revenue. And we hope we have it. And then the debt service. So if we look at alpha, so here's alpha, right? So these guys are saying, okay, we're going to do this with a 37.7% gross profit. That's after the cost of goods. And we got a pretty good gross profit, so we're going to spend 24.7% on our staff. That margin minus labor, right, is 13%, right? It's a simple gross profit or margin because as dollars it's gross profit, as a percentage, gross margin. So we say, okay, margin minus our personnel expense, we have 13% of sales for everything else. And everything else we've been talking about, right? That's all of these costs, right? So here's all of the little subdivisions in our other operating expense, and we're like 10.8%, which leaves us with EBITDA of 2.2%. Okay, but what about, so now we're gonna, so don't relate alpha, beta, and delta directly to how they funded it, right? That's one question. The second question is, how are they operating? So, oops, oh, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, EBITDA. So what I've talked about is, why do we care about it? Because EBITDA covers all these other expenses, right? So we really want to look at that. So here's beta. So now beta is a co-op that's like, well, we're not actually catering to upper middle class folks. We're interested in food access issues. We're interested in serving communities where they're low wealth communities. And so price is going to be made really important. In fact, we know that they're shopping at Family Dollar, and they're going to be able to compare to that. So, you know, we're going to like maybe a 32% margin in order to stay price competitive, maybe lower. So if you look at all these other expenses, if you want to get the same EBITDA, right, you have the same operating expenses, in that case, you have to lower your personnel 5 points, 5.7% of sales. So there's a $200,000 reduction in what's available to pay the staff.
How do you do that when, because this is, I'm from Fertile Ground, so you already know that is literally our model, but
Yes.
how do you, a big part of our mission statement is for people to be paid a fair wage.
Yes. So that's the balancing act,
Okay.
right? So, you know, there's a glib answer that, because I don't have a good answer.
Okay.
And the glib answer is that in all likelihood, over the years, because they had high gross margins, people were able to have, they didn't have to focus on personnel expense as much. For example, I talked to a client who said, yeah, we want to move the store. Looking at their finances, like, you guys have you've been in business 30 years, you have no cash. Oh no, at the end of the year, if we've made more than we need, we give it to the staff in bonuses, right? That's great for the staff, but it's not great if you want to actually do things, right? So there may be some opportunities there. And I worked in an environment, I ran a store where I had my story that I tell is a grocery manager who stopped me when I was trying to break down a box while I was talking to him. And he said, let me show you the fastest way to break that box down. They had looked at every aspect of their job down to the level of breaking down the box. And so there may be opportunities there, but it's very clear that this co-op, Beta, is going to have to struggle with this, right? In order to have the same EBITDA for the same obligations. EBITDA is the same, but, right? Is that good? We had to cut personnel expense. So, and as you just pointed out, there's probably nobody in the room that's going to go like, well, that works.
Right.
So now here's beta. I didn't put all three up. Here's beta. Now here's delta. So they've got the same approach to product, 32%, but they're like, we want to pay staff better. So now they don't have 24.7%, but they're like, we're going to push that up so that we're not cutting as deeply. And that leaves them with no EBITDA, right? Well, and EBITDA, of course, pays for everything, like cost of capital and all the other things you want to do. So where does that leave you? So remember our three stories, right? We have a co-op that is probably in an upper middle class neighborhood in kind of the old model with better margins, higher personnel. We have Beta, who's relying on debt, so they need EBITDA, but they're going in with lower prices. And then we have Delta, who's like, we want the lower prices, but we've got to do something else. All right, so I've shown you this chart, right? And so this is what we're talking about. Like, how do we get to what EBITDA has to cover? And this is a reminder, right? Our three co-ops had these different obligations. And you think about those three narratives about what they're doing, and they're going after funding, and the narrative, I have no idea how fast I'm talking. Where are we? We're going to, we start 3 o'clock. Are we a half hour in? Well, I hope you guys have a lot of questions. So here's the thing. The co-ops are going to go out and they're going to look for money, right? You're going to talk to grant funders. You're going to talk to lenders. You're going to talk to your owners. And of these three visions, right, out of that comes the narrative. Now, each of them has a compelling narrative. There's no question about it. But you have to think about, what's our narrative? What's our story? It's about racially diverse supply chains and self-determination and food education and financial literacy and all these things that go into the story about your co-op. And then you're going to go out looking for the funds. You're looking for things like new market tax credits if you're in the right kind of census tract. You're going to your local community, to the city, and you're saying, we need your support. I'm working, Bethlehem, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, they're talking to their congresswoman, and she winds up getting them a $2.5 million federal grant. Hey, they said there's a lot of hoops we have to jump through to get it, but who in this room wouldn't mind jumping through some hoops for $2.5 million, right? And so those are all that you keep telling the story, your story. You keep looking for the funds, and that's what you do with the vision. That's what you have to do, right? And what you have to do is you have to maximize the sources of funds that you don't have to give back. If you can do that, right, because the stuff you have to give back is it's all the things that we talked about that come down here. But the stuff that you don't actually have to give back, which is the tax increment financing from sometimes the city might do a grant for job creation or for catalytic development. When we did the Durham co-op, the city participated and Duke University participated because it was in an area where people wanted to see catalytic development, right? They wanted the jobs, they wanted investment in that part of the community. And every startup should be focused on this. But for some, it's going to be essential. Okay, so I told you I hope you have a lot of questions. Here's the deal. I've gone through this pretty quickly. But we looked at the 4 cornerstones. We looked at 3 different visions, what the impacts on the operating a grocery store are, particularly as it relates to a co-op. And we talked about 3 different approaches to funding to really emphasize how the different sources of funding impact outcomes. Where are we at? Oh, okay. So that's, this is like I get to where it's like questions and answers and all of that. I'm just gonna back up to here, so it doesn't feel like we're quite done yet. And I'm gonna open the floor to questions, all right? Yes, sir.
Well, you got your EBITDA, but it seems like two out of those three would be operating in the hole when you got to net earnings, because you get taxes and interest. I mean, $77,000 is not a lot.
Well, yes, please don't think that these represent real co-ops, right?
Okay.
No real co-op is going to ever be able to borrow $5 million, right? And no real co-op who has significant debt is going to operate with an EBITDA of $77,000.
Okay.
I was trying to demonstrate different kind of impacts, and I just made up some examples.
Okay.
And your co-op will be your co-op. And so that whenever I work, like I'm pointing over at Chris because we're working with them, and the whole goal is to model what your vision is, what your plan for funding is, what your intent is in terms of the customers you plan to serve, the community that you plan to be in. And then we're looking at, does it all work? And if it doesn't work, what can we do to make it work?
And I had one other question. Is it just the preferred shares that end up paying the owners a dividend, or do some co-ops also pay a dividend to the regular common?
Yep. Did you all hear the question? Okay, the question was, right, preferred shares and common shares. Okay, so the answer is that the goal that you have is to eventually pay your common shareholders, your members. Some co-ops organize as nonprofits, but most organize as a stock corporation, as a co-op. The goal is to pay a dividend. Your preferred shares get first crack at leftover revenues, which is why they're called preferred, right? They have two preferences. The first is they have first call on excess revenues. And the second is, you know, we're going to have to think about what you do if the co-op fails, right? You have a stack of who gets paid first, and preferred shareholders who will probably never see their investment back anyway, but they come ahead of the common shareholders. Common shareholders are your members. So since you raised that question, I'll go into a little bit more detail. A typical stock corporation, Amazon, like they sell stock, you buy shares, and if you own 100 shares and they declare a dividend of $1 a share, then you would get $100, $1 for every share. But our co-ops operate differently. The first difference that you all know about is that no one can buy more than one share, right? So no one's going to have. So if they paid out a dividend based on the number of shares, everybody would get the same dividend. However, we might both be members of the co-op, and I might never shop there. And you may shop there for all of your purchases, right? And that is how the dividend is determined for the common shares. It's a patronage dividend. So, so they would look at it and they say, okay, we're gonna give back 2% of your purchases as a patronage dividend. If I have 0 purchases, I get no dividend. Co-op, people who aren't co-op members get nothing because they're not members. They're not owners. The owners might get, so if you did $5,000 worth of business and you got 2% back, if I get my numbers right, I think that's 100. And I would get nothing because I had done no business with the co-op. That's the distribution of a common share or patronage dividend.
Would it be safe to say that membership shares and patronage dividend refunds are written into the bylaws, but you may not have stuff about preferred shares written into your bylaws, at least initially when you're starting out?
Well, I think, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm pretty sure that if like your articles of incorporation will say that there's so many common shares that can be sold, which is usually a really big number, and so many preferred shares. But the bylaws may not talk about, they may not, the bylaws themselves, but then when you put together your prospectus, your offering to tell people, hey, if you invest, this is what you get back, you're going to tell them that they're going to have a preferred claim on dividends.
I was just going to comment that we went through that process and we left our preferred shares section in our bylaws very vague, just because in order to change those, we have rules in the bylaws, and so they were purposely left very vague, so we had flexibility with them, and then included most in our prospectus.
And not every state allows preferred shares
Right.
anyway, so you might not have those
Right.
at all.
No, and that's right. And some states that do allow preferred, I mean, every state has their own rules, right? So it's all, I always say, if state law allows, because every state is different. So you would just have to confirm. Yes, sir.
So have you seen a scenario where a holding company, for instance, owns multiple co-op grocers, right? And some of them located in high wealth communities and others are located in low wealth communities. And what the holding company does is it takes the higher EBITDA of the high wealth, communities and stores and uses it to subsidize the low wealth stores, thereby not having to make such draconian sacrifices with regard to staffing compensation, for instance.
So there are co-ops, I wouldn't call them holding companies.
Okay.
Right? They're co-ops which have multiple stores. And there are a couple of them who have one or more stores in each of the kinds of communities that you're describing, right? We might, everything is on a spectrum. We could say, yeah, those are in more low wealth communities. And they might even have a different kind of product mix. But they all operate under the same trade name, as far as I know.
Right.
And the way that you're describing it is accurate, because the store it's typically the older, more established store is making money, and the store which has been opened in a low wealth community is losing money, right? So they're not adding money to the income statement so that it's not losing money, but the way they can operate that is because this one's making more than that one is losing.
Exactly.
Right. I believe that Willie Street here is in that situation, and the Merck, which is in Lawrence, and I think Topeka is their second store. I think the Topeka store is in that situation. Those are the two that I'm most familiar with.
I had a question just with, in general, when you're doing your financial model and you're coming up with the assumptions, do you have any suggestions? Because every grocery expert like I've ever showed my assumptions, they all tell me they're wrong and they all give me different answers. So like, it's confusing because they're like, well, no, it's, in LA, oh, the cart is $75 a cart, or this, like some of the assumptions, like, how do you have, I guess all is an assumption. So, I mean, how do you,
Yes.
what do you suggest for
Right.
us?
It's so first of all, wherever you are, right? So one of the principles of co-ops is co-ops help each other. So wherever you're located, right, you're trying to identify co-ops that are in similar situations. And that's much easier for co-ops that are operating in the older, what I would call the more recently traditional model. But you're looking for any information you can get that's specific to co-ops. The second thing that I tell folks is you can't, like if you're thinking about what's the transaction size, right? Now that's going to be different. There might be two co-ops, 2 miles apart, and one of them is a really big store with a really big selection, and the other is a really little store with a little selection, and the size of the transaction is going to be really different. So I tell folks, you need to have a market study done by an expert, and there are 2 or 3 that do market studies for co-ops, including I have a colleague at Illuminate. And that's, when I worked for Durham, When they first said, we would like you to do this, I gave them a whole list of like, these are things that you need to be doing if I'm gonna work for you. And they came back and they said, no, we have somebody on our board who can do a market study. I was like, no, not if you're gonna ask your friends, your neighbors, your members to invest in this co-op, right? And I'll tell you what, you go to a bank, they're gonna ask you who did their market study.
Exactly.
Right? And if you say, oh, we did it ourselves, it's not gonna get a lot of traction.
It's not going to be worth the money it's printed on, because that's what the bank looks for whenever you're getting any financing. And so,
So then the next thing, go ask your question. I'm
No,
sorry. No, go ahead.
well, no, this is my issue because, like I said, right now I do have some quotes out there, for the market study, and the quotes range in ridiculous pricing to normal pricing. I think, and maybe this is an assumption, it seems like I've seen people in my area pay ridiculous. I'm in Los Angeles, and we kind of share with each other, and another organization shared with me theirs, and I knew the assumptions were all wrong. Like, I knew it. I looked at their study. They paid a ridiculous amount for it. Are they paying so that the numbers can look good so they can get financing? I mean,
Yeah.
that's what it looked like. I mean, I don't know how to say it the right.
Well, I think it's a big,
Politically
I
correct.
was looking at the agenda for I think it was the meeting yesterday, and one of the top of the black-led co-ops, right? And I think that one of the agenda topics there was like how to get market studies that reflect issues around diversity, racial diversity. And so it's clearly a topic of conversation, right? It's an issue. I don't know how to address the idea that that the people who are doing the market studies are not informed or making the wrong assumptions, or I really don't know how to do that. Right?
My number one question, and it will help me, I don't know if it'll help others, but what should we be looking for when we're trying to hire a market study company? Because you can get 3 market studies and get 3 different answers.
Right. So yes, that's absolutely true, right? And I was lucky when we did Durham because we hired one.
Okay.
They hired one before they hired me, after we had our conversation, who did a series of market studies. And then a couple years later, I hired a different firm as a project manager. But I gave them one site that was the same so that I could compare the 2 of them, and it came out the same.
Oh.
So I was like, okay, that's good. That made me feel good.
Yeah.
A little bit of relief. But what I would do that if I was looking for pro formas, if I was looking for market study, if I was looking for a project manager, I'd say, what are we looking for, right? So now I'm putting together a request for proposal, or perhaps a request for qualifications, right? Because you want to know, what do you want to know? I'd be asking, this is what our vision looks like. How many market studies have you done for our vision? How many of them, like our vision, have come to or open? And the answer may be, maybe 1, maybe none. I don't really know yet. And then you might be like, and have you compared sales? You're looking for that information. And you want to know at least 3 references, right? You always do. So that you can call and say, how'd you like working with firm X? And they feel like, no, they never listen to us.
And
That's a
bad.
problem.
Yeah, that's
right?
bad, yeah.
Right. What they're bringing to it, what they should bring to it, is the willingness to listen without compromising what they know, right? Because if you're hiring an expert, you're hiring them with the premise that they bring something to the table. And so they should be able to answer your questions. They should be able to defend their work, right?
And then my last question, I'm sorry, other people have.
No.
Well, my last question is, because with my founder, she doesn't really care what the feasibility study says. Even if it says it's not going to make $1, she really wants it in a very particular place. But we still need to get it for financing. So I guess my question is, if the person just really wants it in a place, what do you do when the numbers say this is not gonna work here?
Can I rephrase that question a little bit? I think, because I have a similar situation, I think the understanding is that there's a market study for what a grocery store looks like, but there's a market study for what food security looks like. How do you get the financing to understand that the grocery market study is not relevant here? The food security market study is what is prevalent.
So, I'm not sure you'll like this answer. I'm sorry. At the end of the day, right, we're operating businesses. We have sales. If we do a good job, people are buying product. We have gross profit, which pay for the staff and the other operating expenses. If you're talking about a model that says, because of our focus, this is the challenge. If you're saying, look, because of our mission, because of our vision, our sales are going to be, there's no one out there doing market studies that understand what our sales will look like, right? Then then I don't have an answer for that, right? Because they're all, I'll let everybody talk, I'm sorry. But it's a challenge because if there's no one else doing it, right? If they can say, oh yeah, you're like so-and-so, and we can see what they're doing, but if no one else is doing it, nobody has the ability to say, this is what it's going to be like.
Can I respond to that before you
Yes, absolutely, because you raised the issue.
That's something that we need, and I'm going to speak very openly.
Please.
That is something that black people need white people to do. We cannot convince our financiers why it is important to put co-ops in black communities because of the risk, quote unquote.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Yes.
I would disagree with that. I think we can. If you say you can't, it's not going to happen.
Okay.
I think we can. What we haven't been able to do is convince financiers why those risks, basically that this is a solution to those risks. It's not the same in the rural white neighborhood. It's just the fact that there's no food and you can make a business off of food. So
we don't have the data to back us. I agree with what you're saying.
And I say that, and I'm not phrasing this as a question, but literally as an ask. We need you to advocate for it. You know, we are having a problem with financing, and we need help.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Thank you. You raised the question initially. Can we let other people talk, or did you?
No.
Great. So you were first.
I wanted to ask you to, can you talk a little bit more about EBITDA? Like, for example, I understand most of it, but like, for example, amortization. Like, I get the general premise of it, but can you just like go into it just a little bit more?
I can. But before I do, there was a topic, right, and people had things to say on it. So before we talk about EBITDA, does anybody want to, like, kind of bring a closure to the topic that was raised about?
I raised my hand about that too.
About
what he said.
That's why I called on you.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I took it to a whole nother
That's
thing.
all right.
Yes, bringing it back. I'm in full agreement with what he said. That black co-ops, the majority of us are in low wealth areas.
Yes.
We simply do not have the data to support and convince and assuage, like to let people know, hey, you should fund us. We have, this, not only that this is a need, but we can be successful. And the main thing that we hear from funders is, oh, that's too risky. We don't know about that. That hasn't been done much, And so I just wanted to just get behind what he's saying. Like, we really need white folks to be like, to help us out with that.
Right. So, okay. So you raised your hand.
I did. I don't know if I have the solution or whatever, but I think that something as black-led co-ops need to, I guess, is our strength in that area is using our creativity to bring in where it might lack in groceries. We have this, and I don't know if you get what I'm saying, but we are a creative people. We have to think outside of the scope or the box that they put us in, because they'll say no. We did a market study in Cleveland for the projects, and it was like a 3,000 square foot grocery store, because the market study said, right, knowing that they spend double or triple that amount in a convenience store that's the 3,000 square feet on liquor and you know, junk food, and you know what I'm saying, but that's something that the people like. So now we got to be creative with our people. What do our people like that might not be liquor or lottery or junk food, but let's be creative, because what do our people spend money on? We spend money on what we like. So yeah, we got groceries, but maybe we can put some art in there or some music in there. You get what I'm saying? That people will spend, our people will spend money on. So we just have to get creative.
And then you had something.
Yeah, I really appreciate this, and I agree. And I think it's, the daily table plight is not completely relevant, but it is a model where they lose money and rely on grants. It's a nonprofit, but it's an example where it's in a neighborhood, a low wealth neighborhood, and they they provide food where it doesn't exist, and they're highly successful, and in that they're providing food to places and they're spending more than they're making, and you have a lot of contributions from the neighborhood, and I think it would be worth bringing them to the table. The daily table is doing what you say is impossible, to spend more than you're making in food.
Well, it's not impossible,
Yeah.
but you have to have a way. So,
They have grants.
like, so I got, at the risk of like continuing this conversation longer than we needed to, I want to tell a story about a co-op that served a low-income, not a co-op, I'm sorry, community grocery store. They sold $1.6 million in what they called direct public offering, which was like preferred shares, in the community. And they raised millions of additional dollars, like from mission-driven lenders. And they opened a store, used new market tax credits, very creative, a community organizer, a black-led organization, and they got all the funding. Now, the only reason why black-led is relevant is because it's what you're asking for. It's investment in a particular business. That wasn't enough, right? The store's closed. I didn't work on it early on. I got a call from the lender who had $6 million in the project. And they were like, what do we do? Well, when that store closed, that $6 million was gone forever, right? It was invested in the community, but what the lender was looking at was they would never be able to reinvest that $6 million in another business, right? Because that's what they wanted. It's a mission-driven lender. They want the money back so they can keep investing it in other similar community-oriented operations. So at the end of the day, if the business, if you're selling product, if you don't have money, now, how did you describe it? I said it was impossible.
Yeah, but I guess the gap there was filled by grants.
That's the answer, right? Mm-hmm. So you say, okay, we're going to run a business, and it has I'm not sure that charitable is the right word, but it has an element to it that goes beyond the business itself. It's like, okay, that's great, right? And I do that sometimes with an organization. So the subsidy that you need to look for, and I use the word subsidy to kind of under what you were talking about earlier, is just to make it clear, you've got to find this money, right? And this is how much you're going to have to find every year, right, to do what you want to do, right? Because the business side of it is only going to carry so much weight.
Yep.
And the lenders, most of the lenders that are banks, and right, they have a mission, and they've got federal regulators, and they're really worried about like a federal regulator, like saying, you know, you guys are not operating your bank efficiently. But all the other mission-driven lenders that are here and so forth, they still want their money back. I'm sorry, you said?
I was making a snide comment that the banks weren't worried about that in 2008.
Very true. Very true.
Yes.
In the previous session, Darnell Adams talked about, I think it was Dorchester, suburb of Boston.
Yes.
Their co-op, which low income, enlisted the aid of a politician, didn't name any names, but she got a $2 million grant.
Yes, sir.
Somebody else was in that session?
Yeah, I was there.
Okay, it was the $2 million grant.
Yep.
2.8 for their store. So you might reach out to politicians in your area.
Absolutely. You should have, you know, your story, right? This is what we're doing, and then you've got to, and where you're right is you need allies. You're absolutely right. You need allies. But you also got to reach out to like everyone you can think of, and to this is what we're doing. Okay, let's see. Wait, I'm going to start from the back and work my way forward. Yes.
Okay, Don, you guys just finished.
That's the elephant in the room.
Right, we're in the same situation as her. Right?
Which co-op?
Southside Food Co-op, Chicago, Illinois.
Okay, great.
So we're in the same situation. But what Debbie did was gave me creative ideas of what would sell our co-op to elected funders, investors, Love Fridge, collaborating with different organizations, coming up with a roundup program to offset if we want to give people with EBTs lower rates on their food and things of that nature. So what she did in the market study, she came up with a lot of creative ideas that will sell our co-op to people that we're going to be presenting it to.
Okay.
So that's what the market study does. They help you figure out, okay, what's going to sell? What's going to get you the money? What's going to help you get everything? Because we told them what we want, right? We told them how we want to help you. Our community is mission driven. I'm a pastor, so I'm definitely mission driven. So we told her all this, so she started at the end up saying, okay, this is this and this. Have a banging deli. I heard Costa say that earlier. That's exactly what their store is going to do. Have a banging deli because she knows that's going to sell for her.
That's right.
So it's just, you get a lot out of that market study, that professional market study. You get so many ideas that you never thought of.
I think to both of your responses is the boundaries that exist across the country in the particular neighborhood I'm speaking about you can't even get homeowners insurance because the risk is so high.
Right.
So when you got boundaries like that, like you mentioned the elephant in the room, like these are some of the problems that some of our communities are facing.
Okay, let me ask you another,
So
can I ask another question?
Sure. So I wanted to say, hey, I'm sorry. I struggle to like
Bernadine.
recognize people, and as soon as you started talking, I was like, that's Pastor Bernadine back there.
I was going to say too, what about partnering with closer co-ops? The ones that's maybe doing better far from you, but maybe will take you like a sister co-op. So sometimes it's just reaching out to others to say, hey, can you help us with this? They might have the capacity to do it. You just never know.
Or even other nonprofits.
So everybody has their journey. There's different ways to get there, but
Just don't say take
being
no
here,
plans.
That's the
talking, bringing these issues up, that's a step. That's a great one for everybody. Let's see, wait a minute. So I had you, and then I'll come back over there.
Quick comment, and it's maybe not even an intelligent one, but I just got out of the data management session, and it was talking about data leverage with your owners, and I know there's gray areas and elephants in the room, but is there something that financial institutes also need to be captioned early on as a startup to show what your surveys, whatever, what your owners want for products and services that we can do to collect that data as we get ready to get serious? Just more of a comment.
Thank you.
Yes, there was another speaker earlier in this room, I think it was Dr. Flynn. And he was talking about they came up short in their membership and they needed to do some contingencies, and one of them was this preferred offering. And yet, from what you were saying, the preferred people, stockholders, never get their money redeemed, never get it back out. And yet this was kind of an emergency that, is it a certain kind of person that you go to buy preferred stock in a co-op? Because it's not like buying preferred stock in, Dow Chemical or something.
Right.
Like
So the quick answer is every co-op is different, right? Pastor, I don't know where Pastor Flynn went. But you're looking at typically people that are investing in our loans and our preferred shares. They're not looking at what's the return on investment. They're looking at how do I support this co-op, right? Because they have a story that I believe in. And so in your community, the people you'll go to might be different than the people that Pastor Flynn went to. And the goal is to eventually be able to return that investment to the investors.
We're going to people who got the money to spend. They've got it to blow. Like they're not needing that quick return.
Yes. I mean, all of us are in different communities, right? You may be in a community where the people around you, they don't have loose change. But they don't have money to invest. And then there are co-ops in that situation, and they got to find a different pool of sources.
But Leaf, they'll get their money back, and they'll get their interest.
They hope to.
Yeah.
They're in deals right now where it's questionable whether they'll get their money back. Right. Let's see, you were next.
Mine may not whole lot of sense, but if you've had your market study done, and the sites you're looking at are all pretty much very close to each other, so the market study pretty much says they're so close together, it's the same situation, right? When do you know when you're ready to get the pro forma done, or what precedes readiness to go ahead and move forward to?
So the question is like, when do you do a pro forma? And I was just smiling because I was thinking, I love this. This is a great conversation because we're covering so many different things besides, which tells me like, hey, I think I nailed it on the presentation.
Yes, good job. The site hasn't been selected because still trying to acquire the land. The land went up to $1.6 million per acre. It's crazy, this gentrification thing is nuts.
So when people ask me, when should I do the pro forma, my answer is when you're ready, right? And you're ready when you're ready. What happens with the pro forma, somebody was talking about all the assumptions that goes into it. And when I do a pro forma for someone, I don't just do a pro forma, deliver it, and I'm done. The pro forma is just the start, right? It's the first thing that we do is I talk like, what's your vision? What do you know? What do you know right now about your community, right? Rents are how much? And then, oh, you're in Los Angeles, so we got to really think about how much property tax you're going to pay, right? And so we look at what you know. And then I bring in a lot of assumptions about things like, oh, we don't know how much it's going to cost to build it out. We don't have a site yet. But we're thinking about buying one. So we want to start with that. Okay, great. So we'll put all that in. And then the answer comes out. And the answer is almost always, at least on the first draft, is almost always horrifying, right? It's like, oh my gosh. And it's like, that's okay, because we build from there, right? We think about it, we talk about it. Like, and I'm there for the next couple of years, right?
So we don't have to already have the land in the building?
No.
Okay.
Or a market study. I mean, the market studies are good because we will need a market study. But every time you learn something new, I'll update the pro forma.
So I didn't pull the trigger because I thought that I already had a land under contract. So sorry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at some point you're going to want to model it, right? And see, well, if this is what we do, what is it going to take to get to where we need to go, right? So the answer might be, yeah, we've already under contract for the land, and oh, okay, well that means you're going to have to raise this much in these ways.
Okay. Thank you.
Let's see. Was there someone else at the table that had a question? I thought I saw you. No? Okay. Yes, sir.
This is just a suggestion. Thinking outside the box. Anybody in the room that's from Oshkosh? No. Okay, well, Oshkosh Food Co-op opened July of 21. One of the interesting things they did a naming rights prior to opening the store. So like the produce aisle, And I think it was a bank, or no, I think it was a hospital they approached. You know, hospital wants healthy people, produce is healthy, you know. Well, think of a hospital near where your stores are going to be, and go to that hospital. There's the hospital. Typically, a hospital would have a foundation. Somebody in that hierarchy of hospital would have money.
So,
And then, because they want the people around that hospital to be healthy, right?
so when I started, I said, you know, you come to the conference, you can learn over Zoom, but one of the things that you do is that you take away from here the things that resonate with you for your co-op. So if you hit, so clearly when you heard Oshkosh, that resonated. That was like, that'll work.
We're going to do it.
For someone else, they may be like, that's not going to work in my co-op, right? And that's fine, because other things hopefully will resonate with you about your co-op. So thank you for sharing it. And if it resonates with you all, that's great. And if it doesn't, that's one you get to set aside, right? I'm always like, get home and I'm like, what were the takeaway? What were all the things that did resonate, right? Those things I remember. Now the question earlier, now I'm going to do something a little technical, which was, what is, now tell me a little bit more about depreciation, right? That's,
Amortization.
well, amortization, do you understand depreciation?
Kind of, sort of. And
Kinda,
I'm
sorta.
gonna connect with you because you actually did our pro forma. And so,
What's it called?
fertile ground.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, you said
so
that,
we're
that's
gonna,
right.
We're gonna meet too, but I just
Right,
want you to talk about it.
Yeah, you're my home ground there, right? The, so I'll tell this story real quick. Depreciation and amortization are kind of two sides of the same coin. Some things get depreciated and some get amortized, and we usually talk about them as sort of the same thing. Let me tell you about I love talking about depreciation because it's so weird and complicated, and I think I can simplify it, which is this. Your co-op, so this is the story I tell in order to highlight it. Right? Your co-op buys a refrigerated case for $7,000. It does not, that $7,000 doesn't show up here. It's not an expense. The reason it's not an expense is because you actually, the value of the co-op hasn't changed. It had an asset, $7,000. It traded it for an asset that was worth $7,000. So the co-op is the same, right? No expense. But we say that that case has a useful life of 7 years, right? So after 1 year, we take $1,000 off, and we say that case is worth $6,000. And actually, for people that are doing this, right, there's a list of every piece of equipment in your store, when it was bought, what the useful life is, and what the depreciation is every month for every single piece of equipment. But this one, this number shows up on, because that's a real expense. You used up $1,000. It's actually in other operating expenses. It's called depreciation, right? So if it's a real expense, our expense that year was $1,000. Why did we add it back to get EBITDA? Because no cash went out the door for that expense, right? The money went out the door when we swapped it for the case, so we just added back in to EBITDA because EBITDA tells us really what our core earnings are, what we have left over. And amortization is usually the term applied to things like intellectual property. If somebody goes out and they buy another business, you pay for their assets, but then you also pay for some intangibles, like they've built up a trade name. And that gets amortized over time. Same thing. Okay, any other questions? We covered a lot of ground. We covered much more than this. We had a great starting conversation, and I really want to underscore the request that we all think in terms of being allies. That and we may not, I'm still understanding, I'm still learning about, and I have a number of clients that are opening co-ops, like you all, like you all back in Southside. And it's still like every day, it's something new to learn. So we have to approach with an open mind, with a realization that the models are not the same for everybody. And that, in fact, when people say we need allies in the room, that's the rest of us.
Right.
So thank you all for coming. I hope this was beneficial. Oh, there are, thank you. There are evaluations on the table. And if you would fill one out and leave it with our volunteer, thank you for coming today. Appreciate it very much. Thank you.